Hello, and welcome to today's edition of Dr. Carole's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman. Well, we have a great show for you today. It is called How Today's Anti-Semitic Times Show Why Jews Still Need Laughter. Jews have needed laughter. The reason why Jews are so funny, for the most part, I certainly think I'm a riot, and my guest, I'm sure, outdoes me a thousandfold, but I'll get to him in a minute. Um, the reason why comedy has always been so important to Jewish people, I mean, for example, the Catskills. I was born and bred in New York, and I used to go to the Catskills, and the best comedians came from the Catskills. Sid Caesar, I mean, all the old-time comedians, they are the makers of comedy. And so the reason why comedy flourished amongst Jewish people is because we have had to flee. We have had such traumas and such disasters, so many people coming after us, of course, notably the Holocaust, and now October 7th, that the only way Jewish people were able to get through these horrible things that befell them was through humor. So at that, I will introduce my guest. His name is Salvador Litvak, and he goes by the accidental Talmudist. I'll let him explain that. He was born in San Diego, Chile. He grew up in New York. He says, as a gangly Jutino redhead, he was always identified with outsiders and iconoclasts. He is a director of films. His next picture coming up is Guns N' Moses instead of Guns N' Roses, in case you didn't get that. His new book is called Let My People Laugh, Greatest Jewish Jokes of All Times. And he's he calls himself the accidental Talmudist after the Talmud because he shares Jewish wisdom, humor, and history with millions of people around the world. And his production company is called Pictures from the Fringe. He also directed the Passover comedy and cult classic, When Do We Eat? That's always at the Seder for Passover. That's always the question. The reading of the Haggadah it takes a long time, especially with my grandfather. It took hours, and so the question is always, when do we eat already? When do we eat? He also had did created a film called Saving Lincoln, and he was graduated from Harvard, NYU Law, UCLA Film and TV. And he has coached the gold medal winning USA Masters and Grandmasters golf teams at the 2022 Maccabiah Games in Israel. So, Coach Sal, he is a very well-rounded people, a well-rounded person, and a well-rounded entertainer, and he is a treasure. So, Sal, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carol. It's great to be here. It's amazing to me that all those things you said. I can't believe they're all me. I
I
suppose
know.
it's
That's how I know. I know the feeling. Um, okay, so the reason why I called today's show How Today's Anti-Semitic Times Show Why Jews Still Need Laughter is because, other than the Holocaust, this is the worst, most anti-Semitic time in history, in world history, not just American history or Israeli history or European history, world history. Um, and as I was telling you before the show, one of the things that has really been an eye opener for me in terms of how I know this is because I do a lot of volunteer work with people who have been affected by October 7th, and I do it by Zoom, and I do it with people in Israel. In America, Israelis in America. I mean, Israelis in Israel, of course, Israelis in America, Israelis in Europe, Paris, France, Luxembourg. This morning I was talking to a woman from Luxembourg who was crying for an hour and a half. And all of them actually, they talk about how not just October 7th and Hamas and terrorism and all of that, But the anti-Semitism that is in their place where they live, obviously not in Israel, but in places outside of Israel, the anti-Semitism that they are dealing with is just overwhelming. And as this woman said this morning, it's eating her up inside. And of course, we all know that I didn't totally interpret this for her. I mean, I said that that's not good, that's not healthy, etc. But what that means, if you feel that you're being eaten up inside, that's cancer. That means that you are bringing on, unconsciously bringing on your stress, is bringing on cancer. So this is a very serious problem. What are you going to do about it?
Wow, Carol, thank you for all of that. And it's exactly right. October 7th is just the single worst day, not just for Israelis, but for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And in a way, October 8th was even worse, because before Israel had even begun its response, before the war as a war had begun, the anti-Semitism exploded around the world. American universities, I have two kids in an American college. To respect their privacy, I won't say which, but it's in the news all the time, is what I'll say. And it's devastating. These people who now are saying the quiet part out loud. It's like we had this
Yes.
80-year respite after the Holocaust, where the Jew haters, who've always been among us, felt it was not acceptable to say these things out loud. And that's over. They're saying it out loud and proud, chanting it in the streets. They're basically saying death to the Jews on American streets, American campuses.
Yes.
It's unbelievable, except it's not, right? It is believable. You know, my mother and my grandmother were Holocaust survivors.
Mm,
My grandfather was murdered in a concentration camp. Absolute miracle story. My grandmother carried my mother as an infant through a concentration camp.
mm,
And then the pictures of my grandfather were around our house. And if there was a Holocaust program on TV, my mother and my grandmother were watching. My grandmother always lived with us, and I was very close with her. And they were sitting there and watching it and crying. And they would say to me, and I was born in Chile, as you mentioned. My mother and grandmother were Hungarian. They moved to Chile when my mother was a child, after the war. And then eventually we ended up in the United States. And so from that side of the family, they always said, oh, it could happen here. Of course it could happen here. It could happen anywhere. And we, the young people, would say, yeah, okay, not in America.
right.
Europe was something else. The Middle East, maybe, but not in America.
Right.
And they
Absolutely.
would have been saying, oh, we told you. We told you.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I remember being going to Sunday school, temple school for years and being confirmed. This was in New York. And and of course they taught us, about the Holocaust. And it was like, oh, this was this horrible, horrible thing. But that happened back then and
Right.
back there. And they said never again. So I believed them. So did you. And so did a lot of people.
But actually, what we're seeing now has been more the norm in Jewish history. And something that the Jew haters love to say online now is, well, see, you've been attacked in every century and every nation around the world. There's obviously something wrong with you. You're the problem,
Uh-huh.
or
Uh-huh.
you wouldn't be attacked. And why does Jew hatred exist? It has always existed. There is something about us that attracts it. We've seen recently, I think there was a small genocide in Syria. I think 20,000 Syrians were just murdered. No one cares. It's not in the news, because no Jews were involved. But when
Mm,
Jews are involved, somehow it's in the news. And there's something about the world. There's many theories. The Jews brought the Torah into the world. The Jews brought the Bible into the world. The Jews brought an objective moral code of right and wrong that comes from God into the world, and people don't like it. Jews have been persecuted everywhere, and so we tend to show up in a new country. And
mm,
because we're studious people with a honed survival instinct from being chased out of so many countries, and we tend to find the business that we can succeed in and do well at it. And then jealousy becomes another reason. And whatever the reason, we're too poor, we're too rich, we're too involved, we're too standoffish. Really, they just hate us and pin it on
Uh-huh.
some reason, you know?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yes, I agree with
But
you.
throughout all of that, and this gets back to your title of your show, we have to find a way to live. We have to find a way to be besimcha, right? It's actually a commandment to be happy
Mm.
in the Torah, particularly on Shabbos. And so, with all these troubles that have been dogging us for millennia, how can we be joyous, particularly once a week on the Sabbath? And humor becomes one of those pathways and an important pathway. And we even read in the Talmud, which is the oral tradition in Judaism that stretches all the way back to Mount Sinai. So the written Torah was accompanied by the oral Torah. And so our great sages in every generation have added to that wonderful fountain of Jewish wisdom that grows in every generation. And one of our great sages was named Rabbah. And the Talmud says that Rabbah would always begin his teachings with a joke,
Mhm.
and his students would laugh. So either they were very polite to Rabbah or he was genuinely funny.
Yes, just a little note, side note. I was talking before about the comedians and the in the Catskills and all that, and I just wanted to say, I'm not sure. I think he did start in the Catskills. Jackie Mason, he's my favorite.
Oh, yeah.
D-
And comes from a long line of rabbis. So he would
Mm,
be
mm,
very familiar with everything we're talking about here.
yeah. Well, so okay. So tell us how you got from being this gangly Jutino redhead. Who were you? You said you always identify with the outsiders. Um, were you teased when you were growing up? How did you get from there to here, is what I'm asking.
Sure. So we came to this country. I had a weird name. My parents called me Salvi, right, short for Salvador. Spanish is my first language, but
Mm.
I'm a Jewish kid who's a Latino. I look Eastern European. I speak Spanish without an accent. That's already a little weird. I'm on the tall side, and I had a big red Jufro. I mean, like a shock of red hair. So freaky foreigner, right? I always felt like a freaky foreigner. And when we got to this country, like I said, the Hungarians had already fled Hungary, and then they went to Chile. And in Chile, in 1970, a man named Salvador Allende was elected, who was a socialist and a communist. And the Hungarian side of the family said, "Yeah, we've seen this before. We're out." And
Huh,
that's how we ended up in America. On my
huh,
father's side, my grandfather, and I were all born in Chile, but my great grandfather came from Ukraine, fleeing pogroms.
huh.
So this idea that wherever you are as a Jew, you need a portable profession, you need to be educated, you need to figure out how people succeed in any particular country and do that, right? So we
Yes.
got to this country, and my parents asked around and said, okay, well, the thing to do in America is to go to Harvard and be a doctor. So that's what you're going to do. And I was 5. So I said,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And that was the plan. And so, as long as I could keep up the grades, my parents didn't really care what I did. We were Gen Xers. We had a lot of freedom, did not have helicopter parents. I was good at school. But I was also into other things, even in high school. I was into bicycle racing. That actually helped me get into Harvard because it was quite unusual.
Oh, well.
And at Harvard, I was a rower. Um, I went to Hebrew school as a kid. I had a bar mitzvah in a conservative synagogue. I was very uninspired by Judaism because the way it was exposed to me was not about God. I was always very interested in God, which was of vital importance to me. It made no sense to me that the whole world, the Big Bang, happened for no reason. There must be a God, I reasoned as a child. And if God made the world and the creatures, he'd be interested in creatures that are interested in him. And I wanted a relationship with God. So I was always interested in spiritual practices. and I didn't find Judaism very spiritual, so I went elsewhere. Not to other religions, but meditation, rowing at Harvard was actually a very spiritual endeavor, martial arts, Grateful Dead shows, drumming, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And and I was a pre-med, so I really respect you, Carol. I mean, it's amazing that you went through all that training. I was not. I was always a good student, but when it came to organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry, they did me. I was done in. I wasn't good
Well,
at it.
you're gonna laugh at this. I didn't like those things either. Biology I liked, but chemistry, organic, inorganic, physics, even worse. Um, but so I was a psychology major in college, and just took the minimum that you needed to get into medicals. Those I took those courses, biology and chemistry and all of that, physics and all of that, the main courses, but I actually failed or the second semester of organic chem
Huh.
because I didn't really like the first semester so much. And and where did I go to make up? I needed this credit, right? I went to Harvard.
Huh.
I took organic chem in Harvard. I thought, I'll show my professors, I'll do this at Harvard. And I got a
Wow.
B at Harvard. So,
Well done.
you
Well
know,
done.
there was a lot of motivation.
Well,
Um,
for me, it was just too much, and meanwhile, I was enjoying my literature classes very much, and so I switched to English, and eventually became an English major, which meant I wasn't going to medical school, so I went to law school. But really, I was finding my way, finding myself, figure out who I am. I'm a soul. We don't have souls. We are souls. We have bodies. And I was trying to figure out why I, as a soul, came into this world. What was I meant to do?
and
And
let's leave our listeners on a cliffhanger
beautiful.
because we need to take a break, and that's a good one. What was he meant to do, folks? Well, I think he's meant to do the things that we've been talking about. Um, but it's going to be interesting to hear how it is that you got from there to specifically what you do. So you have to stay tuned to find out. We'll be right back. Again, my guest is Salvador Litvak. His book is called Let My People Laugh, the greatest Jewish jokes of all time. So stay tuned. And welcome back to to Dr. Carol's Couch. I almost said the Terrorist Therapist Show, which is my other podcast. Welcome back to Dr. Carol's Couch, where we're talking today with my guest Salvador Litvak. Today's show is called "How Today's Anti-Semitic Times Show Why Jews Still Need Laughter," and his book is Let My People Laugh: Greatest Jewish Jokes of All Times. So, we were in the midst of, we were following, as a psychiatrist, I always ask my guests, like, how they got to the point of whatever it is that they're doing. So, because I'm so interested in that, like, what makes people go in certain paths. Um, so we were up to where you were at Harvard, and you had just changed your major to English because you didn't like the sciences either. Um, to tell you the truth, medicine, it's so funny because you don't really need, I don't know that I ever used, I mean, yeah, chemistry in a way, but I don't know that I ever used anything in physics um, in my medical career. But in any case, that's what you have to do. I think you have to prove that you can do it. And then,
Exactly.
so there you were as an English major, and you had an epiphany, and that was,
Yeah, that I was looking for my mission, my mission in this world. Um, and one thing that was an interesting part of the journey was as an English major, I took a class called The Bible as Literature.
mm,
And we read the Bible cover to cover. And there were all these stories. Like I told you, I'd gone to Hebrew school a few days a week as a kid. There were stories in the Bible they certainly never shared with us when we were little kids. Genesis 34, the Dinah and Shechem story comes to mind when, what happens is Jacob and his 12 sons, who would become the 12 tribes, and one daughter, Dinah, return to the Holy Land from having lived in his father-in-law's place. And they set up shop, so to speak, near the town of Shechem. And the prince of the city comes out. And he's quite attracted to the Jewish girl, Dinah, and he rapes her.
oh, wow.
And then he falls in love with her. And he gets his father to come out and say, listen, my son is really into your daughter and he wants to marry her. And we're very wealthy people, so you should just settle down here and your sons can marry our daughters and our sons can marry your daughters and it'll be good for everybody.
Yeah.
And the sons of Jacob were quite offended, to say the least, by this offer following the rape of their sister. But what they did was a very strong response. Basically, they said, well, we can't intermarry with you if you people are uncircumcised. You need to get circumcised. And this young prince was quite a salesman, apparently, because he convinced all the men of the city to do the same, so that he could marry this one girl. They all got circumcised. And while they were recovering from their circumcision, as a military mission, they came into the town and killed all the men and took all the women and children as slaves and left a ghost town and moved on. Now, I'm like,
No,
how?
they don't. I never heard that story. You're right.
There you go. They don't teach that one very often. So that's Genesis 34. And I'm thinking, well, if the Torah is the origin tale of the Jewish people, this story does not make us look good. What's
Right.
going on in this story? And I had no rabbi in my life to discuss it with. And if I had, the rabbi would have said, yeah, the story does not make us look good. Jacob was furious with Shimon and Levi, his sons, who really led this effort, and said, this is terrible. Now, there are perhaps legal reasons, and they really were kind of, back then it wasn't like now. There weren't police forces. There's not some court that you could take, go
Right.
to or get police to arrest this guy for rape, etc. And if you were going to do something, you better do it. You go after the king, you better kill him, or else.
Yeah.
There were a lot of reasons, but bottom line, Jacob said this is a terrible thing. And he was infuriated with his sons, and he reminded them of it on his deathbed.
Mm.
So the origin tale of the Jewish people is not some hagiography. It's not we were born in the mists of time, the most wonderful people who ever lived. It's about humans who make mistakes. And the big difference going forward would be that Levi would make a teshuvah, would make an atonement, and would say, "Oh, I was very impulsive and impetuous and coming from a place of rage, and I need to fix and change that in myself." And Shimon
Oh.
didn't, and their descendants, you could see that happening to them. That's why the Levium, right, the descendants of Levi, and I'm one of them, are very respected in the Jewish world, and were appointed by God to be the ones who serve the priests and help, the worship of the whole Jewish people. That's just an example of stuff that's in the Bible that, when you examine it not on a juvenile level, there's just so
Mhm.
much to learn from. And by the way, the oldest joke on earth is also in the Bible, the
Yeah.
first joke, right? And knowing so many Jewish people, as I'm sure you do, Carole, you immediately hear the Jewish tone of voice when we come out of Egypt, right now after the enslavement in Egypt, and God rescues us with miracles, the 10 plagues and parting the sea. And then we're beyond that. Now we're in the desert. And I think it's actually before the Red Sea when Pharaoh's army is coming.
Mm.
Uh, and they're all panicked. The people panic. And one guy turns to Moses and says, "Because there were not enough graves in Egypt, you brought us out here to die in the desert." That sarcastic tone. And that's in the Bible too.
Really? Huh.
Yes, yes. Um,
Right.
at any rate, and I should tell a few jokes along the way, right? People keep hearing about the book Greatest Jewish Jokes of All Time, and they're like, is he going to tell a joke? Is he going to tell a joke beyond his story? So I'll just mention one joke and then we'll go on with
Sure,
the
sure, sure.
story. This is my favorite joke. So at an interfaith conference, a rabbi, a priest, and an imam are on a panel, and they're asked by the moderator, "What do you hope people will say about you at your funeral?"
Mm.
So the imam says, "At my funeral, I hope they'll say I put the needs of my congregation before my own." And the priest says, "At my funeral, I hope they'll say I extended my ministry beyond the walls of my church." And the rabbi says, "At my funeral, I hope they'll say, look, he's moving."
That's very good.
And I do laugh at my own jokes. I think you shouldn't trust a chef who doesn't eat his own food or a humorist who doesn't laugh at his own jokes.
Good point. So we're getting close here. So how did you go from where what you were just saying at Harvard to what you've been doing?
So, yeah, so since I wasn't going to medical school, I went to law school. I went to NYU, and NYU law was a great thing for me because I was in the Village in New York, which is one of the great art centers of the world. And I would just be out late at night. It's like law student by day, poet warrior by night, just in weird places around the city, after hour clubs and just strange joints, and always with a journal and always taking notes and
Mm,
trying to figure out where do I fit in? What was I sent here to do?
mm.
And having been an English major and always just a lifelong reader, my heroes were novelists. So I thought I would write novels. And then a friend of mine went to film school. And I said, "Film school? What's that?" He says, "What do you mean, what's that?" "You teach how to be a film director." I said, "There's a place for that." I would have thought that the only people who get to direct movies were children of celebrities.
Yes, right.
And at Harvard, there was like a film department, but it was super pretentious, making art movies that were so boring and intellectual, but not what you see in a movie theater.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know there was a path where you could become the guy that makes movies that play in a movie theater. And
Yeah.
once I heard about that, I said, "Well, I want to do that. That sounds like the best."
Yeah.
And I had some loans from law school. So I asked around, and the best film school that is also a state school is UCLA. And in the MFA directors program, they were going to take 18 applicants out of 700. I said, "Okay, well, I have no business getting in. But if I get in, then it's going to be a sign from God
Yeah.
that that's what I
Yeah.
should do." And somehow I talked my way in and ended up at UCLA Film School in the MFA Directors Program. And as soon as I started, I was so grateful and so thankful. that I had not missed that opportunity because I felt like I was born to do this. And that's how I started making movies. Of course, when you go to film school, it's not like law school. At the end of law school, there's hundreds of law firms offering big jobs, big salaries. And if you can shake hands and interview well and have reasonable grades, there's a job. But after film school, you're qualified to direct a movie or fetch coffee. And the only job they're offering is fetch coffee.
Did
So you
you,
have-
let me just interrupt for a second. So were you graduated from NYU Law School? Did you finish?
Yeah, I finished and I even worked at a big law firm, Skadden Arps, for a year and a half while I was going through the application process to get into UCLA.
That's what I was wondering if you ever actually worked as a lawyer. And that's what showed you you don't want to do that, right?
Yeah, I was an M&A lawyer, mergers and acquisitions. It was so, it's just document production, due diligence. The client is some corporation represented by lawyers and bankers. There's no personality or there's no person, that you can really
Right.
care about involved in all that. And it's very good for some people. It's an intellectual kind of puzzle solving exercise. But me, I mean, I would like back then, there was Blockbuster, and I would rent a movie on videotape and get a TV and VCR from the AV department of the law firm and just sit in my office and watch movies when I was
Uh-huh.
working on mergers and acquisitions. Um, and I was just so blessed to end up at UCLA. I was
Okay.
not
So
religious yet. That's something that came a little later. And that happened while I was in film school, and always very focused. It's funny, at UCLA Film School, I was also a misfit because my goal was to get out of there and make a feature film that would play in movie theaters.
yeah.
And that actually is not what most of the other students, were trying to do or had figured out how to do. It was like they were making movies that as therapy, just movies about their own angst, and they were just like they were boring. What can I say? They were boring. Like your job as a filmmaker first is to entertain. Now, you're going to want to do something with substance because any movie you work on, even a short film, is going to take years out of your life. So it has to be something you care about.
Yeah.
But if it's message first, entertainment second, no one's going to sit through that. It's going to stink. So I was really trying to learn how to make a great movie and to write scripts because no one's going to hand you a script. So you have to have a script for a good movie. And then you have to find the money because, again, there's no studio waiting around for a kid just out of film school to set him up with a crew and stars and millions of dollars. You have to make it all happen yourself. And whenever I speak to young filmmakers, I'm always telling them you got to put yourself in a position where you're not waiting for somebody else's green light. You have to make it happen yourself. And I think that's good advice for anybody in any field. Find a way to make it happen yourself. And during that period, first of all, I was blessed to meet my wife. She is a screenwriter, and we're a screenwriting team now.
Oh, huh.
But she was working as an executive at Disney and hating that actually, because it's nice to be close to the movies, but as an executive, you're not a creative. The most you're doing is giving notes to writers, and she wanted to write movies.
Right.
And we had a lot in common. Her dad was Argentinian, so we could speak in Spanish together, and we're Jewish, but not religious. We met on New Year's Eve going into 1997. And then later that year, I got the call from my mom that my grandmother was dying. My beloved grandmother Magda from Hungary that I've told you about was reaching the end. She was in hospice care. And I came home and I was sitting next to her when she took her last breath. And my mom was next to me and my brother was next to her. And you can't always tell when somebody's taking their last breath, but in this case, we could. And we're all crying, and something pulled my attention away from her face and to the middle of the room, and the air seemed to shimmer, and then something opened, and I could see her. And Carole, I'm not a person who has visions. Okay, this is the first time that, and the only time
You're
that
not
something has happened
schizophrenic.
to me.
Okay, yeah.
And uh, And I saw my grandmother, not sick with cancer, but the way I knew her, wonderful, laughing older woman. But she was moving away from me towards something, someone. And then I recognized my grandfather from the
Mm.
photographs. And I was like, oh my God, she's been waiting for this to be reunited with him for 53 years. She never remarried. We all knew that she wanted to be reunited with him when she left this world. And now I'm seeing it. And the weird thing is,
Uh-huh.
she doesn't want to go. I'm like, why
Huh.
doesn't she want to go? And then I got it. She's embarrassed. He's this young, handsome man she last saw in 1943. He never
Huh.
met his daughter. He was taken away while my grandmother was pregnant. And she's embarrassed because she's an old lady. And he reached out and pulled her into him, and they embraced. And then it was brighter. And then she was young again.
Oh my God.
And then it was like this love drenched, unbelievable moment. And then it got really bright. And then they were gone. And I was just left stunned, stunned. And I didn't know what to do with this.
Did anybody else see it? Your mother or your brother?
I didn't even talk about it with them. I thought, well, this surely happened in my own imagination. I mean, it couldn't have been
Mhm.
real, but it was real. And I've talked about this so many times in places, and it's amazing how many people have had very similar shared death experiences. And this one for me was absolutely life-changing. And when I got back to LA, that change began.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. Well, we do need to take another break, but when we come back, we will get continue on with how that changed your life. My guest is Salvador Litvak. His book is Let My People Laugh, Greatest Jewish Jokes of All Time, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to Dr. Carol's Couch, where we're talking today about how today's anti Semitic times show why Jews still need laughter. And thank goodness then we have people like Sal Litvak, the author of Let My People Laugh, Greatest Jewish Jokes of All Time. We've been following Sal's life, really an amazing trip so far. And we had gotten to your grandmother's passing and a sign of God, basically, a sign of heaven and God. And that put you, I'm waiting to, so that is what put you in the direction of,
Yeah, I came back to LA, having witnessed, right, her soul leave this world and rejoin with her Beshert, her soulmate, her husband, whom she was waiting to rejoin for 53 years. And when I got back to LA, I wanted to honor her. I didn't know what else to do, so I went to a big conservative synagogue like the one I grew up in. I thought I would say Kaddish, the mourner's prayer. And uh, and that day, thank God, the rabbi was a gifted speaker, a really great teacher. He didn't end up becoming my rabbi, but it opened my eyes that if I thought rabbis were boring, it's because I hadn't been exposed to great rabbis.
right.
Uh, and so I started taking classes and learning from lots of different rabbis around LA. We're very blessed here to have great teachers, gifted
Yes.
speakers, and um, and every rabbi, whoever taught anything, would mention the Talmud because the Talmud is this incredible repository of Jewish wisdom that has been added to in every generation since the Torah was given 3,300 years ago. And um, and so I was curious about the Talmud, but when I would go to a Jewish bookstore, as I was getting more involved, going to synagogues on Shabbat, on Saturday, and just reading and learning, like I said, taking classes. And anytime I would go to get a book or a gift for somebody or some other object of Jewish rituals at a place called the Mitzvah Store in LA, which used to be on Pico Boulevard, run by Rabbi Shimon Kraft. And then I would see the Talmud. So if people are old enough to remember the Encyclopedia Britannica, so the Encyclopedia Britannica was these large maroon colored volumes, 23 of them containing the wisdom of humanity. And the Talmud is 73 volumes containing the wisdom of the Jews. And it's just so vast. And I didn't go to yeshiva and I don't speak Hebrew, at least I didn't then. And it was too intimidating. I wouldn't know where to begin. I'd heard that for Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, you're supposed to be 40 before you can even start learning it. Perhaps for the Talmud, you have to be 40, and maybe even you have to be a rabbi. I don't know. I
Yeah.
guess it's not for me. Walk away. So my grandmother died in 1997. Over the next, 8 years till 2005, repeat that scene a dozen times in that store, thinking about the Talmud, look at the volumes. There's so many of them. It's so big. I guess it's not for me. Walk away. Finally, 2005, I go through that thought process. I start to walk away, and something stopped me. And I said, you know what? This is ridiculous. I went to Harvard. I went to law school. I went to film school. My wife and I are book people. There's just books everywhere in our house. The Talmud is just books at the end of the day. There must be a book one. I'll just
Yeah.
get that and see what it's like. So I figured out that book one of the Talmud is called Brachas, blessings. I found it. I took it to the register. Now I'm feeling good at myself. Hey, I'm buying the Talmud.
Yeah.
And the kid at the counter says, oh, you're doing Daf Yomi. So I said, what's Daf Yomi? And he looked at me very strangely. He had glasses on. He kind of pulled his glasses down, tip of
Yeah.
his nose, and looked at me over his glasses as if to say, are you kidding me? And I thought, okay, so Daf Yomi is a code. If you don't know the code, you're not allowed to read the books. Now he has to get rid of me without embarrassing me. It's so awkward.
Yeah.
And he said, well, Daf Yomi means page of the day, and it refers to a program where people around the world read the entire Talmud on the same schedule, one page a day.
Huh.
And it takes 7.5 years. And today, is day one.
Oh, wow.
Now,
Yeah.
this would have been miraculous, like if it was month one or even week one, but it was, in fact, day one of the
Wow.
7.5 year cycle. So I bought it. And I said, okay, God, I get the message. I'm doing Daf Yomi. Now, a lot of people start Daf Yomi and they have the long beard and the black coat and the black hat, and they went to yeshiva and they don't finish Daf Yomi because it's a huge commitment. A page of Talmud is not like one page of a novel.
Yeah.
It's teachings and commentary and footnotes. It's an hour. It's an hour a day, every day for 7.5 years. I mean, you get married, you do your page. You're on a trip, you do your page. You're sick,
Uh-huh.
you do your page.
Do you do it just by yourself, or are you supposed to like, excuse me, tune into the Zoom or something with other people, or you just do it on your own?
That is exactly the right question, Carol. You're not supposed to learn alone. I found out right away. You should not be learning alone because you can go off the rails and start making wrong conclusions about what you're reading. So I went online and did a little research. Okay, there's three kinds of Daf Yomi shiur, Daf Yomi class. It's taught in Hebrew, in Yiddish, or in English. So, okay, I'm obviously going to the English class. And I went to one at Eula High School. There was a class there at night. And I come in, with my Art Scroll Gemara, my first volume of the Talmud, published by Art Scroll. And then the other students come in with their thinner volumes because they don't have an English translation in front of them. And then the rabbi comes in and he starts talking. And this class was advertised as in English, but every other word that came out of his mouth was Hebrew or Aramaic, not because he was speaking Hebrew or Aramaic, but because this is just jargon. It's the jargon of a Talmud class. In the same way that if you're speaking to a fellow doctor, you're going to use all kinds of terms that a non-doctor won't know what you're talking about. But in a Talmud class, I mean, that's more than half of the words. And I had no idea what he was saying. And there was just no way I was going to be able to learn in that class unless I studied the whole page first for an hour and then,
Uh-huh.
and I could maybe find an hour a day every day, but not two. So for the next 3 years, I just learned it alone. Now, the Art Scroll Talmud that I was using, it's not just a translation, it's an elucidation. So it's like having a brilliant team of rabbis teaching it to
Uh-huh.
and so I really wasn't learning alone. But it always haunted me that I shouldn't be learning alone, and I was. Nevertheless, I stayed with it for 3 years. Then we moved to a new neighborhood. I used to live in Pico Robertson. Now I live in Hancock Park. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll try again. This is a pretty religious neighborhood. And I found a class not too far away.
Hmm.
And it was the same thing,
Huh.
advertised as in English, but all this jargon, more than half the words. And now I could follow it, which was very gratifying. And I went with that class the rest of the way. And in
Oh, wow.
2012, I completed the Daf Yomi journey. I took my
Wow.
son and my brother and my best friend to Giant Stadium in New Jersey. 93,000 people were there to celebrate this completion of the Daf Yomi cycle,
Oh my God. Huh. Yeah.
singing and dancing a hora, 93,000 strong, and filling this stadium with a celebration of our unbroken wisdom traditions stretching all the way
Huh.
back to Mount Sinai. And I couldn't help but think of Nazis who filled stadiums to celebrate that they were going to murder all of us and burn all our books. And those bastards are gone from this world. And here we were celebrating that unbroken tradition,
Uh-huh.
and a tradition that I was now participating in because my grandmother, with her last moment in this world, really started me on that journey. She was not, I wouldn't say she was Orthodox, but she was pious. She had a little Hungarian prayer book and she lit candles. So I always saw that my grandmother, my mother lit Shabbat candles on Friday, and we had a very quick, not a real Shabbat dinner, but we would have a little wine blessing, a little challah blessing,
Uh-huh.
and then get on with it. So really, the merit of my parents, my grandmother, my ancestors, I think set me up for this. But at that time, I called my friend David Suissa, who was a big fan of our first movie, When Do We Eat, that you mentioned earlier. It's a Passover comedy, very irreverent Passover comedy about a kid who doses his dad with a strong hallucinogen at a Passover Seder. Jack Klugman's last movie. I discovered Max Greenfield, Ben Feldman, Shiri Appleby was in it, Michael Lerner, Leslie Ann Warren. Wonderful cast. And David Suissa, the publisher of the Jewish Journal, was a big fan. So I took him to lunch and I told him this story. And I said, if I wrote that up, would you publish it? He said, Sal, that's a cover story for the Jewish Journal, but don't you have more to say than fits in one article after studying for 7.5 years? I
Yeah.
said, yeah, I guess. He said, why don't you write a column for us? So we called it The Accidental Talmudist. And
Ah.
we, to promote the column, I started a social media page, Accidental Talmudist on Facebook, eventually Instagram. It grew and grew and grew. We have 1 million followers
Oh, wow.
on Facebook. My jokes, especially, have gone viral so many times. And eventually, my new movie, Guns and Moses, which is about a Chabad rabbi who's forced to become a gunfighter after his community is violently attacked, and is going to appeal very strongly to that accidental Talmudist audience, which I want to share with you. Half of the people are Jewish and half are not.
Huh.
Half who are not tend to be Christian, conservative, and very intrigued by Jews who take Judaism seriously and this unbroken tradition stretching back to Mount Sinai, and who are great allies of the Jewish people and of Israel in this struggle that we're having now when anti-Semitism, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, has just gotten completely out of control. And so I find myself, because of this kind of unique story that I've been sharing with you, and as a filmmaker making Jewish movies, and as an influencer sharing Jewish wisdom, and as a humorist telling Jewish jokes, just at this intersection of an unprecedented time in history. And,
Mhm.
never again means we have to defend ourselves. I carry a gun. I was not a gun guy before this period in history, but now I am, and I'm licensed to carry. And we will defend ourselves, and thank God we have allies. But in the midst of all of this, yeah, we have to keep a sense of humor. And if you'd like, I can share one more joke.
Sure. We
People get a
only have two
kick out of that.
minutes left, but you can take it up with that time, with the joke.
Okay, so just quickly, this is one that most people haven't heard, so that's why I like to share it. There was a guy who's a big fan of Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon. And he finally gets to meet him at a book signing. He says, those words, one small step for man, a giant leap for mankind. Did you make that up on the spot? Did you write that? Neil says, I've been misquoted all these years. What I said was one giant leap for Manny Klein. Manny Klein? Who the heck is Manny Klein? When Mrs. Armstrong and I were starting out, we were poor. We lived in a small apartment in an old building with thin walls. And Manny Klein and Mrs. Klein lived next door to us. And Manny would always ask Mrs. Klein for something special in the bedroom. And she would say to him, Manny, you'll get that when a man walks on the moon.
Very cute. Very cute. Well, thank you so much. It has been a delight to talk with you. Let me just tell people again the name of your book, Let My People Laugh, Greatest Jewish Jokes of All Time. So,
Bestseller on Amazon.
yes. And eventually, Guns and Moses. You have to look for the film coming out.
Will be
Guns.
coming out this summer.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again. And thank you all for listening. You've been listening to Dr. Carole's Couch, and I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman.